Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today we're going to do a starter guide for the PowKiddy RGB30. I already made a review video on it, and I was really surprised at how much I loved it. In fact, at $90, it's quickly become my favorite device within this price point. Now, there are a couple things that are involved in terms of setting it up and getting it just perfect. One of the things is taking advantage of that 720p screen that we have here on this device. So in this video, we're going to walk through some of my favorite settings with some of these systems, and then also some of the custom firmware options that you have. We have three major ones right now, so we'll go over each of those and then configure them as well. Either way, my goal with this video is to show you how to set up this device from zero to hero in just one video. And so without any further delay, let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, first thing, I've made an entire written version of this starter guide, so if you'd rather do it at your own pace, you can also check that out. And as time goes on, I'll update the written guide as well, so this will always be up to date. Either way, all the links that you need to find in any of the stuff that we're showing here today will be found in this written guide, and I'll have it linked down in the video description below. Now, the first thing you're probably wondering is where you can actually buy a PowKiddy RGB30. And probably the most obvious choice is going to be PowKiddy.com. Here you can find the device starting at $90 with free shipping, and if you use the code RetroGameCore in checkout, they'll give you another 5% off, so you can get it for about $85. And additionally, you can find it on the official PowKiddy storefront on AliExpress. This one is also going to be around $90 with free shipping, but bear in mind they also have coupons and discounts here and there. So if you do shop around on AliExpress, you might find it for even cheaper. Now the thing with either of those two options, it's going to be shipping from China, which can take, 2 or 3 weeks depending on where you live in the world. However, if you'd like to get it faster, or maybe you want to have easier returns, then you can also find it on Amazon Prime. And it will definitely have a markup. For example, here you can see it's $120, but with a $15 coupon, so really $105. And this one also comes with a couple free perks like a screen protector and a hardshell case. Speaking of cases, this is the one that I've been using and recommending. This is actually made for a 2.5-inch hard drive, but it fits the RGB30 perfectly. And it also has a nice little side compartment to be able to stick in the charging cable as well. Either way, I'll have all this stuff linked in the written guide as well as down below if you're interested. Now when buying the RGB30, you may see that there are different storage options. And all that means is that for an extra cost, they will pack in an additional SD card that's going to be preloaded with a bunch of games. But as I've shown in my other videos, those preloaded cards are never really worth it. The games themselves are going to be poorly organized, or they'll have a bunch of duplicates. It's just not a lot of fun to work with. And so in this guide, we're going to assume that you're going to build your own game library, and I'll give you a couple hints about that here in a minute. Now, one thing that will come with all of the RGB30s is going to be a 16GB card, which will have the operating system on it. And the card that I received is from a brand called Kioxia. And chances are you might not have heard of them. And this is a Japanese brand. It's actually a section of Toshiba that was broken off about 5 years ago. So in terms of whether or not the Kioxia brand itself is legit, then it definitely is. However, the big question is whether or not the card itself is actually from Kioxia or it's like a generic ripoff. And a lot of the cards that come with these devices are often prone to failure because they are cheap generic versions. Now I used this one for about a month and I actually didn't have any sort of issues with it, so if you want to use it, then I'd say you probably can. And if you are, let me show you how to update the operating system to make sure you have the most recent version. Once the device is on, go ahead and press Start to get to the main menu, then navigate down to Network Settings. From here, scroll down to the Network Configuration section and turn on Enable Network. After that, go ahead and find your local Wi-Fi network and sign in. Once you've done that, go back to the main menu and go into System Settings, and then about halfway down you will find a System Update section. All you have to do here is go to the Start Update option and then turn that on. This will update your operating system to the most recent version. Now, if you don't want to use the card that came with your device, I would recommend upgrading to this one here, the SanDisk Ultra 16GB. You can usually find this one for under $10 and it is rock solid. And so next, I'm going to show you how to flash the operating system on a clean SD card like this one here. To start, we're going to need an SD card reader. Again, I'll have this link down below in case you don't have one. And now we're going to plug this into our computer. Next, we're going to go to the JELOS website. JELOS stands for Just Enough Linux Operating System, and this is the operating system that comes with the device. Here in the GitHub page, we're going to go to the Releases section, and on this page, we'll scroll down until we find the section that says Installation Package Downloads. From there, we'll find the section that has the RGB30 listed, and then we're going to download this package right here. This will take a minute, it's about a gig altogether. Once you have that downloaded, we're going to use another piece of software called Balena Etcher. Again, all this will be linked down below. When you have this installed, go ahead and select Flash from a file, and then find that JELOS file that we downloaded a minute ago. Next, under location, it may actually already pick up your USB drive, but if it doesn't, just hit the change button here and then pick it. From there, all you have to do is press the flash button. It's going to ask, do you really want to do it? And you're going to choose the option that says, yeah, man, I want to do it. From there, it'll take a couple minutes to decompress and flash the image, then it'll verify it and you'll be good to go. From there, eject your microSD card and we're going to now put it back into our device. Now, in addition to the operating system card, we also need a game card. This is where we're going to put all of our game ROM files. And so let's talk a little bit about this one next. To start, I recommend getting one that's at least 128 gigabytes in size. That'll allow you to put all of the classic systems on it, as well as a good amount of CD-based systems, so things like Dreamcast, PlayStation, and so on. Now, if you want to have even more storage, then I would recommend 256 gigs, and the price difference will be about $10 between these two sizes. Now, in terms of brand, I think that either SanDisk or Samsung will be just great. And what I do recommend doing is looking between the two brands and seeing which one is on sale over the other. Anyway, once you have that larger SD card, we're going to go ahead and put that in the second SD card slot on the device. Next, we're going to power it on to initialize JELOS. And it's going to repartition the SD card and then also initialize the entire system. This will also take about a minute or two altogether. Once that's done, you will see the JELOS interface right here, but we don't have any games loaded yet, so that's going to be the next thing we need to do. So to start, we need to power off our device. To do that, you're going to press the Start button, and then go down to Quit, and then select Shutdown System. After you confirm the device will shut down, the LED on the front will turn off, and now you can eject your games card, and we're going to put that back into our computer. Now, when you look at the SD card, you're going to see a bunch of subfolders, as you can see here. And this is where you're going to put your ROM files. Now, I bet the first question you have is, okay, Russ, where do I find those ROM files? And the thing about these game files is they are copyrighted, so I cannot tell you where to get them. Instead, you'll have to solve one of life's great mysteries and figure out where to find those ROM files. Anyway, let's just assume that you now have those game files. What you want to do now is put all of those into their requisite folder. However, if you're new to this, you might not know what each of the names of these folders actually mean. Well, luckily on the JELOS GitHub page, they have an entire table that will spell all of that out for you. And this will all be in the written guide, but essentially what you will do is you'll find the system you want to add the games to, and then here it's going to show the name of the folder where you put the games inside, and which file types that JELOS is going to accept. So this part can be a little bit tedious if you've never done it before, but this is going to be the key to your success. For example, if you want to add Atari 2600 games, you would add them to this Atari 2600 folder right here. Now, the second part of this process is adding what they call BIOS files. These are system files that are required for certain emulators to work. And just like with ROM files, these are also copyrighted, so I'm not going to share where to get them. However, in the written guide, I have a listing of the names of each of them. So if you've never found any of these BIOS files before, these names should probably help you. I bet if you combine it with a certain tool that's widely available on the internet, you might be able to find those BIOS files. Either way, when it comes to adding your games and BIOS files, that's basically it. You'll just put those games in the requisite folder, and then make sure that you have the BIOS files for the systems that actually need it. Many don't. Once that's good to go, let's eject our SD card and then put it back into our device, and we'll power on the RGB30, and this is where the fun really starts. And the cool thing about these firmwares is that they will detect when you add these games, and as long as you put the correct file in the folder, you'll be able to see it right here in the main menu. Now next, I want to talk about the menu options you have within JELOS, and to make this easier to see, we're going to plug this into HDMI and see it on the full screen. So to get into the main menu, you'll press the Start button, and let's go through each of these options, starting with Game Settings. Here you can change any of these system-wide settings that you'd like. But bear in mind that many of these have already been pre-configured, so it may not be worth it to change some of these. Among all of them, there's only a couple that I even mess with. One will be the save state configuration. Within here, you can choose to autosave and auto-load your games if you'd like. But really, other than that, I don't really mess with these system-wide defaults because they've already been optimized. However, there is one section I do recommend, and it's called Per System Advanced Configuration. Within here, you can make changes that are going to be specific to whatever console you'd like. And by the way, there are two different ways to get to this menu. You can either go through the game settings like we just did, or when you're browsing through a system, you can press the Select button. This will bring up a View Options menu, and within there is the Advanced System Options. And both of these will bring up the same menu, which is going to be very similar to the system-wide settings, but you'll be able to change them for that specific console. So in this example, Super Nintendo options. And we'll go over my recommendations later on. We're really just kind of getting oriented right now. Now, beyond making system-wide as well as console-specific changes, you can also make game-specific configurations as well. To do that, you want to navigate to whatever game you want to change, and now press the X button on your device. This will bring up a side menu here on the right, and from here there's an advanced game options setting. This is going to be great if you want to make changes specific to that one game. For example, if you wanted to turn on the rewind function for a game, or if you wanted to use a special aspect ratio that you're not using for the rest of the Super Nintendo games. On top of that, if a game is having some performance issues, you can go in and change the scaling governor to performance. This will give you an extra boost in power to make sure that the games are running at full speed. So that's really it when it comes to making some game-specific changes, but there are a couple other things within the game settings menu worth considering as well. The first one is going to be what they call retro achievements. Within this menu, you can turn them on, but then also enter your username and password to associate it with your account. And if you're wondering how to sign up for retro achievements, you just need to go to retroachievements.org and then sign up on their page, and it's totally free. Once you've done that, just enter your username and password right here. But also bear in mind that in order to earn retro achievements, your device needs to be connected to the internet. Now, the final thing within game settings worth considering is the netplay settings. I'm not going to go into detail about this because it's a little bit more advanced for a starter guide, but you're in for a treat because earlier this year I made an entire netplay guide already. And this guide is specific to the JELOS operating system. It'll show you not only how to connect with other devices over the internet, but it'll also show you how to connect to other devices without having any sort of internet connection at all. And this is a really great feature. For example, if you wanted to play 2 devices in a car, you could totally do that on a road trip. Anyway, as expected, all of this is linked in the written guide down below. Next, let's go down to the game collection settings. And this one is handy if you want to curate your games list. For example, under systems displayed, you can turn off or on any game system. So say, for example, you added a bunch of games, but you've decided that you don't actually want to see them. You can go ahead and uncheck them and then they won't appear within the menu. Additionally, there is something called automatic game collections. Within here, you have a bunch of different options you could turn on if you'd like. For example, if you want to have a menu item that lists every 2-player game, you can do that. Or one that's really handy for the RGB30 is to turn on vertical arcade games. Either way, I would recommend going through here and seeing whether or not there's any sort of collection or genre that you'd like to have as its own menu item. Also within the game collection settings, you can create a custom collection. This is a little bit more advanced, but this is where you would do it. Next, let's go down to the system settings. There's a lot of great options within here. To start, you can set your time zone if you'd like, and you can also change the root password in case you want to wirelessly connect to this device. In addition, this is where you'll find the display options. So if you want to turn up the brightness, or in my example, I always like to turn up the saturation to about 60%. This always makes the colors pop just a little bit, and I love that. And finally, another thing within the system settings worth considering is the update function. I would recommend running this update maybe once every week or 2 just to make sure you have the latest and greatest. And then finally within here, there is the danger zone. If you ever mess up any of your settings, you can reset them right here. Okay, next let's move down to UI settings. This will be everything related to the user interface and themes. Now, one thing to bear in mind is because the RGB30 is relatively new and has a unique 1:1 aspect ratio, there aren't really that many themes available for this device just yet. However, the JELOS system theme is here and it works great, and you can also configure it however you would like within this menu here. The other thing I like to mess around with within the UI settings menu is the screensaver settings. And I'll show you how this works in a minute, but by default, after 3 minutes of not touching the device, you'll get a black screen. And personally, what I like to do is change this to random video. And this is a great little feature, as I'll show you here in a second. Next, I want to go down to the controller and Bluetooth settings. And this is the menu item that you'll go to if you want to connect a wireless controller. Like I showed in my RGB30 review, you can actually use this thing as like a little console. You can plug the device into a TV or monitor via HDMI, and then using Bluetooth, you can use an external controller as well. And the way you connect this is very simple. All you have to do is just enable Bluetooth, and then put your controller in Bluetooth pairing mode, and then choose the Pair a Bluetooth device option right here. From there, it'll scan and find the controller and then add it to the JELOS system. And I'm not doing it right here, but just kind of walking you through it theoretically. And after that, you can go into the Player 1 and Player 2 or controller options, and you can choose who's going to be Player 1 and who's going to be Player 2, and so on. Now, in terms of controllers, just about any other Bluetooth controller will work, but I do recommend the 8BitDo SN30 Pro. This is a great controller. It's about $50 and is very nostalgic. It has a Super Nintendo shape. Anyway, that's about it when it comes to controller and Bluetooth settings. Next, let's go into the sound options. And honestly, in this section, there's not a lot really that you can mess around with, but if you do want to add like front-end music, you can do that here, although that is a bit more of an advanced topic. So let's go down to the network settings. There's some gems within here as well. Number one, you need to make sure that you're connected to the internet, so here you will enable your network and then add your Wi-Fi information. And for obvious reasons, I'm not going to add my own information right now. Now within the network settings, there are some unique advanced options. For example, you can enable SSH and Samba to be able to connect from your PC to this device, and you can also turn on cloud saves as well as a VPN. Now I think these options are beyond the scope of a starter guide, but there is a JELOS wiki that'll walk you through all of these options. So if you are interested, then I would recommend checking out these walkthroughs. Next, I want to talk about Moonlight game streaming, which will allow you to stream games from your home PC over into your device. And the setup for this is a little bit involved, but it is a lot of fun if you do want to play more modern games on your RGB30. And as you probably guessed, I do already have a guide for Moonlight streaming, although the video guide is a little bit older, so what I did is I went and I retested it again and then put all of those instructions in the RGB30 starter guide. So everything you need is going to be in the written guide link down below. Next, we're going to talk about Scraper. This is the option that allows you to add fancy box art and videos to your games within the menu. And this is pretty self-explanatory, but you just want to go through the menu options here and choose whatever you would like. For me personally, for my image source, I like to use a box 2D. That's going to show the box art when I navigate through a game. Other than that, I keep all the other options at the default settings. Now this one also requires a username and password, and it's also free to sign up for an account. What you want to do here is go to screenscraper.fr, and on the top right, you'll see an option to register for a new account. Once you have that set up, go ahead and enter your username and password right here, and then press the next button down below. And you're going to get a couple other options. One is going to be whether or not to scrape for every single game on your console, or only the games that are missing media. In addition, you can choose which systems you want to scrape. And what I recommend doing is using the box art for every system except for the arcade ones. And I'll show you why here in a moment. Either way, once you're done with that, go ahead and press start and it'll go through the scraping process. And this can take quite a while depending on the size of your games list, so just kind of give it some time. Either way, once it's done, you'll be able to navigate through your systems, and then when you scroll through the games list, you'll see this fancy box art. And if you pause on a game for a couple seconds, it'll actually start showing a video as well. So I think this is a really fun way to be able to navigate through your game library. Now earlier I mentioned that I don't recommend using box art for arcade systems. And there's a couple reasons for that. Most arcade games did not have box art in the first place. But then also by seeing a screenshot of the game, you can kind of get an idea of what kind of game it's going to be. And the other benefit for the RGB30 is that you can immediately tell whether or not the game is going to be vertically oriented. Because the RGB30 has a square screen, that means that vertical games look really good on this device. So this is an easy way to be able to browse through your games and immediately pick those games that are vertically oriented if you want to play those. Anyway, once you've gone ahead and scraped all of your box art and videos, now's the time to show off that screensaver that I mentioned before. If you remember, I set mine to be a random video. So you've got two options. One, you can just wait a few minutes and the screensaver will start, or you can press the select button when in the main menu and choose Launch Screensaver. This will immediately start random videos playing on your device. And if you'd like, you can cycle through these videos by pressing the select button again or right on the D-pad. And here's the cool thing about this whole setup is that when you see a game that you like, what you can do is press the start button and it'll actually boot that game. So I've always found this to be a really great feature because if I don't know what I want to play, I can kind of cycle through these videos until I find something that inspires me. At that point, I can press the start button and the game will start right up. And by the way, anytime you're done playing a game, all you have to do is hold onto the select button and then press the start button twice. Alright, and finally the last main menu item is the quit menu. This is where you will go to restart the emulation station frontend or the device itself, and this is also where you go to shut down the system. Now beyond the main menu options that we have within JELOS, there's also a tools menu. Chances are you're probably not going to go into this very often, but within here you can find a file browser in case you need to navigate through the files on the system. And this is also where you can start up certain standalone emulators in case you want to go into the configuration without having to start up a game. Okay, next I want to talk about the hotkeys that are going to be available when you're actually playing a game. And all of these are going to be enabled by holding the select button and pressing another button. For example, if we hold select and press R2, it's going to turn on fast forward. So if you want to speed things up, maybe get through a Pokemon battle faster, this is how you would do it. Additionally, if you want to turn on or off the frames per second counter, you can do that by pressing select and Y. Another handy feature are save states, so you can press select and R1 to save a state no matter where you are in the game, and then you can press select and L1 to resume wherever you were when you press that last save state. And then finally, if you want to go into the RetroArch quick menu while in a game, you hold on select and press X. And that's really it for the most rudimentary hotkeys. I have more listed in the written guide below. Next, I want to talk about some of the per system configurations that I recommend specific to the RGB30. And I'm just going to go over some of the more fundamental options in this video here, but I've also made a full table of all the most popular systems and the settings I recommend for each of them. So if you want to get into the details, I would recommend checking out the written guide because it's going to be more comprehensive. Either way, let's go ahead and start with some of my favorite systems, starting with the Game Boy. Now within here, there are quite a few settings I like to change specific to Game Boy. Number one, I like to use the LCD3X shader set. This will provide an LCD grid over your screen, and I actually use this for all the handheld systems, so things like Game Gear and Game Boy Advance also will use this as well. Another thing I like to do with Game Boy is turn on integer scaling. And what this means is we'll basically be blowing up the size of the image to be a full integer scale, so like 1x, 2x, 3x, and so on. And when it comes to Game Boy, an integer scale basically will fill up the whole screen. You'll get a little bit of black bars around the edges, but as a consolation, you will also have really crisp and perfect pixels. Now, integer scaling is a matter of preference and taste. For example, if we turn off integer scaling, it's going to blow up the image all the way to the left and right as much as it can. And so you will get a larger image on your screen, although some pixels will be a little bit unbalanced. Now, thankfully, this has a high resolution. It's a 720p screen, and so you probably won't see those unbalanced pixels anyway. So it'll really be up to you whether or not you want to turn off or on integer scaling. Do you prefer to have balanced pixels or a larger display? And here's a side-by-side comparison, and to be honest, I think that both of them look great, so it's really going to be up to you what you choose to use. Anyway, for my part, I do prefer to use integer scaling with Game Boy and Game Boy Color, and so I have turned it on here. Now also for the original Game Boy, you can turn on certain colorization. The one I prefer is called Special 1, but there are a bunch of different options here, and I recommend experimenting to see the one that you like the best. And these settings are going to be very similar for other handheld systems. For example, with Game Gear, I prefer to use the core provided aspect ratio, which is a little bit squarish, a lot like the Game Boy. In addition, I also turn on integer scaling with that one. And this is what the Game Gear games will look like. I think it fills out a good amount of the space and they look really good. And I also use the same setting with Neo Geo Pocket Color. This one also had a squarish aspect ratio, so it's going to look really good here even with integer scaling on. Now for the Game Boy Advance, it's a little bit unique. This one has a 3:2 aspect ratio, but is also a perfect 3x integer scale. So if you do turn on integer scaling here, it's not actually going to do anything, because no matter what, it's going to blow up to the full screen and you'll have perfectly balanced pixels. So this is kind of a win-win when it comes to both having really great pixels and a large display. Now for home console systems, it gets a lot more subjective and a little bit more complicated too. So we'll start with the Nintendo Entertainment System. Here I like to set it to an 8:7 aspect ratio, and then I also do not turn on integer scaling. Instead, what I do is I manually crop the edges on the left and right. To do that, we're going to start up a game and then go into the RetroArch quick menu by pressing Select and X. Within here, we'll navigate down to the Core Options section, and then find the Video Settings. Next, under the Mask Overscan options, turn all of these values to 8. This is going to cut off some pixels on the left and right that usually weren't used for any NES games anyway. Additionally, within the Core Options section, I recommend going into the Emulation Hacks. Within here, you can remove the sprite limit, which means you won't get any flickering with your sprites, and if you'd like, you can also overclock the CPU speed. A lot of old NES games had some inherent slowdown, and if you'd like to avoid that, you can change that by setting it to a 2x speed. This game right here, Blaster Master, is a perfect example. By default, this game will have a ton of flickering and slowdown, especially in this first area. But as you can see here, we're not getting any flickering with our sprites, and we're also not experiencing any sort of slowdown. Of course, it's going to be up to you whether or not you want to play the games like how they were back on the NES, or if you'd like to play them in a kind of perfect setting. And really, there's no wrong way to do it, it's just a matter of what you prefer over the other. Next, we're going to talk about Super Nintendo, one of the best systems to play on this device. Now here, what I do is I set it to an 8:7 aspect ratio, but then I also do turn on integer scaling. And here we're going to use a trick called overscale. What you want to do is start up a game and then go into the RetroArch quick menu, and then back out into the settings menu and then go into video. From there, go into the scaling options, and below the integer scale option, you will see something that says integer scale overscale. And this will round up to the next integer scale, which happens to be very close on the Super Nintendo. What that means is we'll have perfectly balanced pixels, but not cutting off that much on either edge. Now to save this, we need to use an override. And to get there, we need to go back into the quick menu, and then find the section that's called overrides. It's going to be near the bottom. Now I've already set up an active override file, that's why you can see it here at the top. But what you want to do is choose this one that says Save Content Directory Overrides. That means that every Super Nintendo game is going to use that overscale option. And as you can imagine, it's going to make all of these games look great. This also works really well with the TurboGrafx or PC Engine games as well. Now for the other systems, I prefer not to do that. The Sega Genesis is a great example. This is one that I prefer to play in 4:3, and the difference between integer scaling and not is really kind of big. And so as a result, I actually prefer to turn integer scaling off and leaving it at 4:3. This does mean that we're not going to get perfectly balanced pixels, but to be honest, with a 16-bit system like this, I don't really mind it. Again, it's all really going to come down to personal preference, and I have all of mine listed in my written guide down below. Next, I want to talk about Nintendo DS, but this one's a little bit wonky, so I want to do it via HDMI. To get started, we're going to boot up a game. We'll start with Mario & Luigi Partners in Time. Now, once the game is started, by default, it's actually going to be in a vertical orientation, which is going to be great for the RGB30. But this one doesn't run on RetroArch, it runs on a standalone emulator. And to enter that menu, you have to press the L3 button by pressing down on the joystick until it clicks down. And this will bring up the drastic menu, and the text here is super small. This is why I'm blowing it up on HDMI. But within here, if you want to make some settings changes, this is where you would do it. But to be honest, the default settings are pretty great on the RGB30, so I personally don't change anything. Now, one thing to know when using Nintendo DS on this device is that it isn't a touchscreen, so that will limit some of the games that you can play on here. In addition, by pressing the L2 and R2 buttons, you can swap between the screens and the orientation. So depending on the game that you're playing, maybe you only need to see one screen at a time, so you can set that by pressing L2 and R2. Either way, that's really about it when it comes to setting up Nintendo DS. It's pretty simple. Now for the more advanced systems, Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, Sega Saturn, all of those have already been optimized, but I do have a couple tweaks listed in my written guide if you want them. One thing to bear in mind is that for each of these systems, you do want to do a per system advanced configuration, and you want to turn on the scaling governor to performance. Thankfully, the JELOS team is already aware of that, and so they've turned on the performance already with this chipset. So honestly, there's not really anything you need to do other than to be aware that this will require more power to run these systems. And also, not every single game is going to play at full speed, about 3/4 of them will. And finally, the last system I want to talk about is Pico 8, and the setup for this is a little bit unique. To start, I recommend using the native Pico 8 system. And to do this, you do have to buy Pico 8 as a one-time purchase. And you can find it on their website, and it's typically going to be $15. But bear in mind, once you've purchased a license, you can use it on any system that supports Pico 8. Anyway, what you want to do is download the Raspberry Pi version of Pico 8. From there, you want to unzip the file, go into the Pico 8 folder, and you'll see a bunch of system files. What you want to do here is go into your game's SD card, and then open up the Pico 8 folder and move all of these system files over. Now, I've already done this years ago, and so because of that, it's asking me to overwrite them. And so I am going to do that. By the way, this is also how you would update Pico 8. And really, that's all you have to do in order to get Pico 8 running. Now, once you're back on your device, go ahead and open up the Pico 8 system. And within here, you should see an option that either says Explore or Start Pico 8. And as long as you're connected to the internet, you'll be able to open up what they call the Explore menu. And this is so unique because it'll allow you to navigate through the system over the internet, and you'll be able to browse through and download games. And one of my favorite sections is called Featured. This is going to be the cream of the crop Pico 8 games. So you can update this list and then download and launch these games directly from within the console. And if you find a game that you like, you can press the start button and then add it to your favorites. From there, you'll be able to play this game offline because it's downloaded it already. Anyway, this is a great way to explore the entire Pico 8 universe, or the Picoverse as they call it. And I think having access to thousands of games for $15 is well worth it. One last thing to note about Pico 8 is now JELOS has the option to turn on integer scaling. So if you want perfectly balanced and sharp pixels, you can do that here as well. Next, I want to talk about some of the other operating system options that you have for the RGB30. We're going to start with this one. This is called ArkOS. This one is very similar to the JELOS operating system, but a little bit different in some key ways. Number one, obviously it has a different system theme, but then also the menu settings are a little bit different as well. Some of these you may recognize because they're standard across Emulation Station, but you will find that many of the menu options that you can change in JELOS are not available within ArkOS. For example, if we go into the emulator settings, here all you can do is just choose which emulator will start which system. And that's really about it. It's a very simple menu system. Instead, if you want to make configuration changes for the system, you have to do that within RetroArch. And you'll do this within the quick menu settings and then using overrides. And this is a bit of a more advanced topic, and so you have to really know your way around RetroArch if you want to use ArkOS fully. And it just so happens that I've hooked you up already. I made an ArkOS starter guide a few months back. And so if you are interested in checking out this operating system, I've got a full video and written guide available for you. And finally, one other neat thing about ArkOS is that it has a bunch of different themes available out of the box. However, like I mentioned before, the 1:1 aspect ratio is unique on the RGB30. And many of these themes have not been updated to account for the 1:1 aspect ratio. For example, if we start up this switch theme, you can see that the tiles are overlapping one another, and that's because it's been designed with a 4:3 aspect ratio in mind. So these are some of the things that you'll probably see in a future update down the line. Okay, and the third operating system option that we have is called MinUI. And this is an operating system that's available on a lot of other simpler machines like the MIUI Mini or the RG35XX. Now the thing that's special about MinUI is that it is super simple and easy to navigate. Now the list of supported systems is a lot smaller than the others, and the developer did this purposefully. The whole point of this is to keep it very simple. And so as a result, all you really do is just pick your system and then pick your game and then boot it right up. From there, you can press either the L3 or R3 button to bring up the system-wide menu. And this is going to be universal across all the other systems. Here you can save your game or load up a save state, and you can also go into the options and make some configuration changes as well. Now setting up MinUI on the RGB30 is a little bit more involved than it is with the other systems that use MinUI, so I've gone ahead and set it up myself, and then I wrote out all the instructions in the written guide as well. So if you do want to set it up, I would recommend checking that out, or the README file that comes within the MinUI download. Now, one of the biggest strengths of MinUI on the RGB30 is that it's been configured already with pixel balance in mind. That means that all those settings tweaks that I recommended for like Nintendo and Super Nintendo, they've already been done on this one system. So if you just want to start up a game knowing that you're probably getting the best pixel rendering that you can, then I do think that MinUI is an excellent example. And like I mentioned, the system-wide user interface is very simple. So if you want to make any sort of configuration changes, you can do that. And you can even map your buttons as well as your hotkeys right then and there per system. Another thing that's really great about MinUI is that it has a quick save function. So anytime you're in a game, if you just hold on the power button, it's going to do a quick save and then turn off. And then the next time that you're ready to boot it up, you just hold on to the power button to boot it right back up. And then the operating system will resume wherever you were on that previous game. So again, this is a very simple user interface that is quite refreshing. But just bear in mind that many systems are not going to be available here. For example, there is no official arcade game support, and it also doesn't support the native version of Pico 8 either. So it's really going to come down to what you prefer. Do you want something very simple and pre-configured, or would you rather learn some of those in and outs of emulation through JELOS or ArkOS? Either way, I think all three of these operating systems are pretty great, and I recommend checking out each of them and seeing which one you prefer the most. Okay, and finally, I want to talk about some hardware mods. Now, these are totally optional, but I do think that some of these are pretty interesting. To start, we're going to take the device apart. It's pretty simple. It's just 4 Phillips head screws, and then you will use a guitar pick to go around the edges to undo all of the clips. After that, you can pull off the back cover, and then you need to undo everything that's connected to the back. That'll include both of these speakers on the left and right, and then also the battery cable in the bottom center, and then finally the Wi-Fi antenna on the bottom left. Now the easiest fix is going to be to change out the analog sticks. I honestly think that by default they're not terrible on the device, but if you'd like, they're actually going to be a drop-in replacement for Hall sensor sticks. And this is very simple. All you have to do is just unscrew them and detach the ribbon, and then add your replacement sticks. Now personally, I recommend using the Hall sensor sticks from Anbernic. These ones have a little bit more of a grippy texture around the edges that just feels really good compared to the typical Nintendo Switch style ones. And you can order these directly from Anbernic. It'll cost you about $10 each. And to contact Anbernic to ask them, I recommend going to their AliExpress storefront. And then if you hover over the Anbernic official store option, you'll see a link to be able to contact them. From there, you can request the sticks and they'll send you an invoice and then you'll get it shipped over to you. Now, if you don't want to do that, you can also find some on Amazon. For example, these ones from GillyKit will also work. It'll cost you about $20 for a pair, but just bear in mind they're not quite as grippy as the ones from Anbernic. Now that's the easiest mod you can do, but there are quite a few others and we're going to try out a few right now. And to do this, we need to remove the entire PCB. There are 8 screws altogether. And then we also need to detach the screen ribbon cable near the bottom center. Now the first thing I want to do is try to address the D-pad diagonals. If you saw my review, you will often hit them by accident. And these are the D-pad connectors here on the left. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make them less responsive by adding a little bit of electrical tape. And you can also use Kapton tape if you have that as well. Now I'm going to keep this very simple. I'm just going to add a single square of tape. And I did measure mine, it's about 16.5 millimeters altogether. But as I'll show you in my testing, I think it should have gone bigger, maybe 17 millimeters instead. Either way, that's all you really have to do to improve the D-pad. Next, we're going to go further down the rabbit hole by talking about the rubber membranes. The ones that come with the RGB30 work okay, but they are a little bit cheap and squishy. And thankfully, they are of a standard size, so if you'd like, you can swap these out with the rubber membranes from Anbernic. And you can also get membranes from them by ordering from AliExpress, just like how we talked about with these sticks. However, I didn't have the foresight to actually order some 3 weeks in advance, so what we're going to do here is we're actually going to cannibalize one of my other devices. This is the RG353VS. This is great, but it is a spare device. And so what I did here is I took it apart and then I removed the rubber membranes and then also the D-pad, because I heard the D-pad is a drop-in replacement as well. Now all I have to do is just replace the rubber membranes and the D-pad with those from Anbernic, and then I can just put it all back together. And it's a pretty simple and intuitive process. Just make sure you take your time so you don't break anything. Anyway, once you have your board back into place, you can go ahead and attach all of the screws. And then I'm going to install those new analog sticks as well. After that, I can add my shoulder and trigger buttons and then reattach the battery, the speakers, and the Wi-Fi antenna. Now, right off the bat, in my testing, I found that the D-pad is a little bit more responsive. It just bounces up a little bit more quickly. However, I did find that the D-pad itself is a little bit more flush with the case than I would like. So I think in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have changed out the D-pad. I think I preferred the one with the original RGB30. However, when it comes to the face buttons, yes, these are perfect now. They have a much more tactile and responsive feel to them, and I think this is a big improvement. And of course, the analog sticks work great as well, and they have that nice grippy texture to them too. Now, when trying out the contour test to make sure that I wasn't getting false diagonals, I did find that the D-pad was improved, but not by a ton. So this is why I do recommend using a 17mm square instead of 16.5. In addition, I'm going to go back and put in my original RGB30 D-pad as well, because that one sat a little bit higher in the shell, so I think it's going to work a little bit better. And I think it might also improve those D-pad diagonals too. So I guess in wrapping up the hardware mod testing that I did, I do think that changing out the rubber membranes was totally worth it, but I think it's just fine to use the original RGB30 D-pad too. And so that's really about it for this guide here. I wanted to walk you through all of the setup when it comes to software, and then a couple of the hardware mods if you're into that as well. And I honestly think that the life cycle of the RGB30 is just getting started. And so in that regard, I do expect to update my written guide in the future as more people discover new things to make this device even better. As it stands, this is one of my favorite devices at that $90 price point. And I think after you've got it set up using this guide, you're gonna really enjoy it as well. Anyway, let me know if you have any comments down below, and then also be sure to check out that written guide, which I'll have in the video description. As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.